Thunderclap of revelation shattered the gilded silence as Eloan Caro, her emerald gown torn and spirit aflame, stood defiant before the assembled lords and ladies, her voice a velvet blade cutting through years of whispered scorn. In that electrifying instant, the veil lifted on her hidden labors, the estates salvaged from ruin, the lives mended in shadows, exposing the family's hollow grandeur to the merciless gaze of truth. If this defiant crescendo seizes your soul, urging you to witness the cataclysmic unraveling that follows, subscribe now, for the tempests of transformation ahead will redefine allegiance and autonomy in ways that echo eternally. Eloan, with her poised elegance masking a tempestuous resolve, eyes like storm-tossed seas, posture unyielding as ancient oaks, embodied the quiet fury of the overlooked, her dirt-streaked hands from secret toil symbolizing endurance forged in isolation. The manor of Ravensmoor, a labyrinth of opulent decay, loomed as both prison and canvas for her unseen artistry, where every covert act of mercy challenged the aristocracy's iron grip. As whispers of her deeds rippled outward, igniting societal reckoning, Eloan faced the ultimate crucible, reclaim her essence or fade into their scripted oblivion, her journey a symphony of simmering tension crescendoing to liberating catharsis. The carriage wheels crunched over gravel like bones breaking underfoot, and Eloan Caro pressed her gloved hand to the fogged window, heart fluttering with the fragile wings of anticipation. Ravensmoor rose from the Cornish mist like a sleeping beast, towers of weathered granite clawing at a bruised sky, ivy choking the battlements as if the house itself were trying to swallow its own secrets. She drew a steadying breath, tasting salt from the distant sea and the damp promise of new beginnings. At 22, she carried the modest dowry of a country squire's daughter, but her spirit brimmed with earnest dreams, a partnership forged in quiet evenings by the fire, shared laughter over books, perhaps children one day who would know the warmth of being truly seen. Alaric Blackwood, her husband of 3 weeks, sat beside her, his profile sharp and distant as the cliffs they had passed. He had courted her with gentle words during the London season, reciting poetry under gaslight, asking after her favorite wildflowers, listening as though her voice mattered. She had believed him different from the peacocks in their silk waistcoats. Now, as the carriage slowed before the massive oak doors, doubt flickered. "You'll love it here," he murmured, patting her knee absently. "Ronan and Vespera are particular, but they'll warm to you." The doors swung open before the footman could knock. A butler with a face like carved marble bowed stiffly. "Lord Alaric." "Welcome home, my lady." His gaze slid over Eloan as if she were a misplaced parcel. Inside, the entrance hall swallowed light. Marble floors gleamed cold under crystal chandeliers that had not been lit in months. Portraits of stern ancestors glared down, their painted eyes accusing. Lady Vespera Blackwood waited at the foot of the grand staircase, a column of black silk and diamonds, her smile a blade wrapped in velvet. Lord Ronan stood beside her, portly and flushed, a hunting crop twitching in his hand like an impatient tail. "Brother," Ronan drawled, clapping Alaric on the shoulder hard enough to jolt him. "And this must be the bride. Charming." His eyes raked Eloan from hem to crown. "Though I must say, Alaric, you might have warned us she was unadorned." Vespera's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Do not be crude, darling. Lady Eloan, you are welcome to Ravensmoor. By marriage, of course." She turned away before Eloan could curtsy fully. "Show her to the east wing. The rooms are prepared." "Barely." Eloan's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin. "Thank you, Lady Vespera. I look forward to making myself useful." The east wing smelled of dust and disuse. A single maid, thin, nervous, perhaps 17, unpacked Eloan's trunk with shaking hands. "Begging your pardon, my lady," the girl whispered, glancing at the door. "I'm Nell. They don't like us talking much." Eloan smiled, kneeling to help fold a linen chemise. "Then we shall speak softly. Tell me, Nell, does the kitchen need anything? I noticed the herb garden outside was choked with weeds." Nell's eyes widened. You'd help?" The last lady never came near the kitchens. That night, After Alaric had retired to his own chamber with a vague promise of estate matters, Eloan slipped downstairs. The servants' hall was dimly lit, voices low and weary. A scullery maid wept over a burned loaf. The cook, Mrs. Tremaine, wrung her hands. The range is cracked again. Lord Ronan won't spend a penny on repairs. We'll lose the bread for the week. Eloan rolled up her sleeves. May I? She examined the iron beast, remembered the tricks her mother had taught her on their modest estate. A wedge of oak here, a bit of clay there, temporary, but it will hold until morning. By dawn the range glowed steady. Bread rose golden. Mrs. Tremaine pressed Eloan's hand. You're an angel, my lady. None of them ever cared. Words spread in whispers. The next afternoon Eloan found old Mr. Penrose, the undergardener, struggling to lift a fallen branch. She helped him carry it, then knelt in the mud to prune the roses no one tended. These will bloom again, she said quietly. Like everything, given a little care. Mr. Penrose wiped his brow. You're not like the others, my lady. They step over us. You see us. Days blurred into a quiet rhythm. Eloan moved through Ravensmoor like mist, present, yet unnoticed by those who mattered. She mended a torn curtain before Vespera could rage at the housemaids. She slipped extra coal to the footman's freezing attic room. She read the estate ledgers late at night when Alaric slept, noting the glaring discrepancies no one else bothered to check. Small things. Necessary things. Invisible things. One evening Vespera swept into the morning room where Eloan arranged wildflowers she had gathered herself. What are you doing, girl? Making the house welcoming, my lady. Vespera's lip curled. You are decorative, nothing more. Do not presume usefulness. We have staff for that. Eloan's hands stilled on a sprig of lavender. The words landed like frost. Still, she smiled. Of course. Later, alone in her room, she stared at the sea through the salt-streaked window. The waves crashed endlessly, relentless and unseen. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the small, steady beat of hope. They will see, she told herself. In time. But doubt crept in with the mist. Alaric grew more distant, attending hunts and card parties, leaving her to the cold grandeur. Ronan's jokes cut sharper each day. Vespera's orders grew colder. And yet in the kitchens, in the gardens, in the quiet corners where servants breathed easier because of her, Eloan felt something take root. A fragile, secret belonging. What would you do if kindness was your only weapon against indifference? If you felt the quiet power of being the unseen thread holding everything together, would you keep weaving, or begin to dream of a life where you were finally seen? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and your thoughts make these stories breathe. Months slipped past like fog rolling off the Cornish coast, thick, relentless, swallowing the edges of days until they blurred into one another. Eloan Caro had learned the rhythm of Ravensmoor the way one learns to navigate a dark room. By touch, by memory, by the small sounds that betrayed life beneath the grandeur. She moved through the corridors at dawn, when the house still slept and the servants stirred like ghosts. In the still room, she measured dried herbs into muslin bags for the kitchen, adding extra chamomile for the footman whose cough had worsened. In the attics, she quietly replaced threadbare blankets with warmer ones from the linen press, folding the old ones away so no one would notice the exchange. Small acts. Necessary acts. Acts that left no trace except in the grateful glances of those who received them. Her Cornish blood ran deep in these habits. Her mother had taught her that true care was quiet, that the land and its people answered best to steady hands rather than loud proclamations. Eloan carried that wisdom like a hidden talisman, even as the family treated her as little more than furniture. Alaric's distance had solidified into something almost architectural. He rose late, breakfasted alone in the library, rode out with Ronan for hours, returned flushed with drink and hunting tales. When he did speak to her, it was polite, distracted, as though she were a guest who had overstayed. Their shared chambers had become two separate rooms months ago, The connecting door rarely opened. One evening, after a particularly long silence at dinner, Eloan tried again. "Alaric," she said softly as they climbed the staircase, "I was thinking we might read together tonight. I found a volume of Shelley in the library." He paused on the landing, rubbing his temple. "Not tonight, Eloan. Ronan wants to go over the accounts. Again." His smile was thin, apologetic. "Soon, perhaps." Soon never came. The true tension, though, simmered between Ronan and Vespera. Their marriage was a cold war waged in public politeness and private venom. At dinner, Vespera's comments sliced like silver knives, remarks about Ronan's latest gambling losses, his taste in mistresses, his failure to secure a better match for the estate. Ronan retaliated with sullen silences or sudden outbursts that sent the footmen scurrying. Eloan watched it all from her place at the end of the long table, learning the warning signs, the way Vespera's fingers tightened around her wine stem when Ronan's voice grew too loud, the way Ronan's jaw clenched when Vespera mentioned her dowry. She began to intervene in the smallest ways, suggesting a change of subject, asking an innocuous question about the weather, offering to fetch a shawl when the room grew chilly. Tiny deflections. Invisible diplomacy. One night the storm broke. It was late October, rain lashing the windows like angry fists. The family had gathered in the drawing room after dinner. Ronan, already deep in his cups, paced before the fire. Vespera sat rigid on the settee, embroidery untouched in her lap. "You think I don't see how you spend?" Ronan snarled, voice thick. "That new Parisian gown, £300, while the tenants complain of leaking roofs." Vespera's laugh was brittle. "And your card debts at White's last month? Nearly 400. Perhaps if you managed the estate instead of squandering it." Eloan, seated near the window with a book she wasn't reading, felt the air crackle. She rose quietly. "Forgive me," she said, voice calm as still water, "but I noticed the new shipment of coal arrived today. The fires are burning low. Shall I ask Mrs. Tremaine to bring more?" Both turned to her, startled, as though a portrait had spoken. Ronan waved a hand. "Go on, then." But as Eloan passed Vespera, she leaned close enough for only the other woman to hear. Perhaps tomorrow would be better for this discussion. The rain makes everything feel heavier. Vespera's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. When Eloan returned with the coal scuttle, the argument had guttered into sullen silence. Another explosion averted. Later, in the darkened corridor outside her room, Nell found her. "My lady," the girl whispered, "Mrs. Tremaine says thank you. And Mr. Penrose, he fixed the gate on the south path because you asked. Quiet-like." Eloan touched the girl's arm. "Tell them it's nothing." But it was everything. Her secret work deepened. She began slipping into the steward's office when Mr. Gwithian was away, studying the ledgers by candlelight. The discrepancies leaped out, funds earmarked for repairs diverted to London tailors and gaming hells, tenant rents raised without cause while cottages crumbled. She made notes in a small leather-bound book she kept hidden beneath the floorboard in her dressing room. One night, as she pored over the pages, the door creaked. Mr. Gwithian stood there, lantern raised, face lined with exhaustion and something like hope. "Lady Eloan," he said quietly, "I've known for weeks you've been here after hours." She froze, heart hammering. He stepped inside and closed the door. "I won't tell. But I will say this, you see what no one else bothers to look at. And you care." Eloan met his gaze. "Someone must." He nodded slowly. "The tenants are grateful. Mrs. Nance's roof is sound again because of a misplaced requisition you suggested I make. The bridge on the lower road won't collapse this winter. They don't know your name, but they know someone is watching over them." Tears pricked Eloan's eyes, hot, sudden, unwelcome. "I only want to help." "You do more than that," he said. "You keep this place from falling into ruin while they dance on its bones." He left her then, but the conversation lingered like smoke. For the first time since arriving at Ravensmoor, Eloan felt the faint stirrings of alliance. Not friendship, not yet, but recognition. Someone saw. She walked to the window and pressed her forehead to the cold glass. The mist pressed back, thick and silvered by moonlight. Somewhere beyond it, the sea roared its endless song. She thought of her mother's garden in Cornwall, the way the roses had bloomed even in Saltwind because someone tended them faithfully. She thought of the servants' quiet smiles, the tenants' mended roofs, the averted storms in the drawing-room. And she thought of Alaric, asleep in his separate room, dreaming perhaps of hunts and cards and a life without complication. A small, fierce thing kindled in her chest. She would not disappear. Not yet. Not while there was still breath in her to mend what others broke. Here in the shadows of silence, Eloan Caro began to understand the quiet power of endurance, and the dangerous beauty of being needed, even if no one ever said the words aloud. Winter came to Ravensmoor like a judgment. The first hard frost arrived in early December, glazing the windows and turning the drive into a sheet of treacherous silver. Inside the great house, the fires burned low, coal-rationed wood hoarded, while outside, the tenants' cottages stood exposed to the wind that howled straight off the Atlantic. Eloan felt the change in the air before anyone spoke of it. She had been walking the lower path near the tenant holdings when she heard the shouting. A cluster of men stood outside the Nance cottage, old Mr. Nance himself, red-faced and trembling, arguing with the estate's rent collector, a thin, nervous man named Tregear. "You can't do this." Nance bellowed. "We've paid every quarter for 30 years. My roof's sound now, thanks be, but the barn's falling in and the sheep are starving. We've nothing left." Tregear lifted both hands. "Lord Ronan's orders, Mr. Nance. Rents are raised 20% across the board. No exceptions. Pay by month's end or you're out." Eloan stepped forward before she could think better of it. "Mr. Tregear," she said, voice calm but carrying, "surely there's been some misunderstanding. The leases were renewed last spring at the old rate." Tregear turned, startled to see her. "Lady Eloan, this is estate business. I'm only following instructions." "Then perhaps I should speak with Lord Ronan myself." The words hung in the freezing air. The men fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Tregear swallowed. "His lordship is occupied. In London. He left strict orders." Eloan looked at the faces around her, lined, weary, frightened. She saw Mrs. Nance at the cottage door, clutching a shawl around thin shoulders, two small children peering from behind her skirts. She saw the patched roof she had quietly arranged to mend months earlier, the one that had kept this family from freezing last winter. Something inside her shifted, quiet, irrevocable. "Then we shall wait until he returns," she said. "In the meantime, no one will be evicted." Tregear opened his mouth, closed it, then gave a jerky nod and hurried away down the path, boots crunching on frost. The men looked at Eloan with something between awe and wariness. Mr. Nance cleared his throat. "My lady, you've no authority." "I have eyes," she answered simply. "And I can see what needs doing." That night she did not sleep. She sat at the small writing desk in her room, candle guttering, and opened the hidden ledger. The figures danced before her in the flickering light, rents collected but never recorded, funds siphoned to London clubs, repairs promised but never paid for. Ronan's signature appeared on none of it, only Vesper's elegant, looping hand authorizing expenditures that had nothing to do with the land. Eloan closed the book. Her hands were steady, but her heart beat like a trapped bird. The next morning she sought out Mr. Gwithian in his office. He looked up from his desk, startled by the quiet knock. "Lady Eloan, what brings you here so early?" She closed the door behind her. "The tenants are being threatened with eviction," she said without preamble. "Rents raised without notice. The Nance family cannot pay, nor can half a dozen others." Gwythion's face darkened. I know. I argued against it. Lord Ronan overruled me. Then we must overrule him back. He stared at her. She continued, voice low. There are discretionary funds, small yes, but enough to cover the shortfall for this quarter. If we reallocate them quietly, under general maintenance, the tenants stay. The estate remains stable. Ronan need never know. Gwythion rubbed his jaw. That is irregular. So is starving children while their father is turned out in winter. A long silence. Then slowly, he nodded. I'll need your signature on the requisition forms. As witness. I'll sign them. He studied her for a long moment, really looked at her, as though seeing her for the first time. You understand what this means? He asked quietly. If it's discovered. Then I will bear the consequences, she said. Not you. Not them. He exhaled. Very well. By noon the requisitions were drawn up, signed, and filed in the bottom drawer where no one ever looked. By evening the tenants had been quietly informed their rents would remain unchanged for the quarter. No explanation was given, none was needed. But the spark had been struck. That same night, as sleet rattled the windows, Alaric came to her room for the first time in months. He stood in the doorway, coat still on, cheeks flushed from the cold. I heard what happened on the lower path, he said. Eloan looked up from the book she had not been reading. Did you? Tregear was livid. Said you countermanded my brother's orders. I prevented a cruelty, she replied evenly. Alaric stepped inside, closing the door. You don't understand how things work here, Eloan. Ronan is the head of the family. What he decides. What he decides is wrong. The words landed between them like stones. Alaric rubbed the back of his neck. You're making trouble. I'm keeping people alive. He looked at her, really looked, and for a moment she thought she saw something flicker behind the habitual distance. Shame, perhaps, or recognition. Then he shook his head. You should have come to me. I did, she said softly. Many times. You were never listening. The silence that followed was heavier than the sleet outside. Alaric turned toward the door. Paused. Turned back. Be careful, Eloan, he said, voice low. They will not forgive interference. She met his gaze without flinching. I am not asking for forgiveness. He left without another word. Later, when the house had settled into its midnight hush, Eloan walked to the window and pressed her palm to the glass. Beyond the frost-laced panes, the land stretched dark and silent, dotted with the faint glow of cottage lamps. Somewhere out there, children slept warm tonight because of a signature no one would ever celebrate. She felt the weight of it, the secret, the risk, the quiet power. And beneath it all, something new and dangerous, determination. She had come to Ravensmoor hoping for love, for partnership, for a shared life. Instead she had found a battlefield. And she was no longer willing to stand on the sidelines. The pledge she had made to herself that night was simple, unbreakable. She would protect what needed protecting. Even if it meant standing against the very people who were supposed to be her family. Even if it meant standing alone. What would you risk to protect those who cannot protect themselves? Have you ever had to choose between silence and standing up when no one else would? Tell me in the comments. Your courage, even in small ways, matters more than you know. The new year arrived at Ravensmoor like an unwelcome guest, cold, uninvited, and carrying news no one wished to hear. It was the second week of January when the first crack appeared in the facade the family had so carefully maintained. Mr. Gwythion came to Eloan's sitting room just after luncheon, face ashen, a single folded document clutched in his hand as though it were burning him. Lady Eloan, he said, voice barely above a whisper, you need to see this. Now. She closed the door behind him and took the paper he offered. It was a deed of sale, dated 3 months earlier, signed by Lord Ronan Blackwood, witnessed by a London solicitor whose name she did not recognize. The property in question, the entire southern quarter of the Ravensmoor estate, including 6 tenant farms, the old mill, and the stone bridge that connected the lower road to the village. Sold. For a sum that would barely cover Ronan's gambling debts for a single season. Eloan felt the floor shift beneath her feet. "This cannot be legal," she said, though she already knew the answer. "It is," Gwythian replied grimly. "But the tenants were never informed. Neither was I. The money has already vanished, transferred to accounts in London that lead nowhere useful." She stared at the signature, Ronan's bold, careless scrawl. Beside it, in smaller, more precise script, was Vespera's name. Co-signatory. "They sold the land out from under the people who have lived on it for generations," Eloan whispered. "And they plan to announce it at the spring assizes next month," Gwythian added. Quietly. "After the evictions have already begun." The silence between them was thick with the weight of what was coming. Eloan set the document down with deliberate care. "Then we stop it," she said. Gwythian looked at her as though she had suggested setting the house ablaze. "My lady, this is not a roof repair or a rent adjustment. This is a legal transaction. The family has the right. They have no right to destroy lives for pocket change." She crossed to the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft, relentless, covering the world in deceptive peace. "I need to speak with the tenants," she said. "Today. Before word reaches them from anyone else." "You cannot." "I can. And I will." By dusk she had ridden to the southern holdings, wrapped in a plain wool cloak, hood drawn low. She visited each cottage in turn, speaking quietly by hearthlight, showing the deed only when necessary. Mrs. Nance wept silently. Old Mr. Penrose's hands shook so badly he could not hold his tea. The younger men clenched their fists, eyes burning with the kind of anger that could easily turn to violence if left untended. Eloan listened. She answered what questions she could. And when the last lamp had been trimmed low, she made them a promise. "No one will be turned out," she said. "Not while I breathe." They looked at her, really looked, and for the first time she saw something new in their faces, not just gratitude but trust. The next morning she did something she had never done before. She walked into the breakfast room while the family was still at table. Ronan looked up, fork halfway to his mouth. Vespera's eyes narrowed. Alaric froze, teacup suspended. "Good morning," Eloan said calmly. She placed the deed on the table between the toast rack and the marmalade. Silence fell like a guillotine. Ronan's face flushed purple. "Where did you get that?" "From the place where such things belong," she answered. "With the people who actually manage this estate." Vespera's voice was ice. "You have no business." "I have every business," Eloan cut in, the first time she had ever raised her voice in this house. "You sold land that does not belong to you alone. You sold homes. Futures. Lives. Without a word to the people who have bled into this soil for centuries." Ronan shoved back from the table. "This is none of your concern, girl." "It became my concern the moment I swore to protect what you would destroy." Alaric stood slowly. "Eloan." She turned to him. "Did you know?" He hesitated, just long enough. The answer was written in the shame that flooded his face. "I suspected," he admitted. "But I thought." "You thought nothing," she said quietly. "As usual." Vespera rose, silk rustling like a warning. "You will remove yourself from this room and never speak of this again." "No," Eloan said. The single word rang in the stunned silence. Ronan lunged for the deed. Eloan placed her hand over it, steady, unyielding. "If you destroy this document," she said, "I will simply tell the truth. To the magistrate. To the county. To every tenant who has ever paid rent to this house. And I will tell it in full." Ronan's hand hovered, trembling with rage. Vespera's laugh was sharp and brittle. You think anyone will believe the word of a nobody over the Blackwoods? I think they will believe the tenants, Eloan replied. I think they will believe the ledgers I have kept. I think they will believe the receipts, the letters, the quiet promises you have broken. For the first time, she saw fear flicker behind Vespera's perfect mask. Ronan stepped back. What do you want? I want the sale reversed. I want the tenants secure. I want the money returned to the estate, every shilling. And if we refuse? Then I go to the magistrate this afternoon, she said. With copies. With witnesses. With everything I have quietly gathered these past months. The room seemed to shrink around them. Alaric spoke, voice rough. Eloan, this will ruin us. No, she said. It will ruin you only if you continue to choose greed over honor. She lifted her hand from the deed. I am giving you one chance, she said. One. To make this right. Quietly. Before the world knows what you have done. She turned and walked from the room. Behind her, 3 people sat in stunned silence, 2 of them realizing, perhaps for the first time, that the quiet woman they had dismissed as ornamental had become the fulcrum on which their entire world now balanced. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Eloan stood on the terrace, breath clouding the air, heart pounding so fiercely she thought it might break her ribs. She had crossed a line there would be no uncrossing. The veils had been torn asunder. And whatever came next, she would face it with eyes wide open. The days following the confrontation in the breakfast room felt like walking on cracking ice, every step deliberate, every breath measured, waiting for the surface to give way. Eloan kept to the east wing and the lower estate as much as possible. She rose before first light, visited the southern cottages to reassure the tenants that the sale had been halted for now, helped Mr. Gwithian draft formal letters rescinding the transaction, and quietly gathered duplicate records of every questionable transfer she could find. She moved like a shadow, expecting at any moment to be summoned, dismissed, or worse. The summons came on the 4th morning. A footman, young Thomas, who had once thanked her with tears in his eyes for extra blankets in winter, delivered the message with downcast eyes. Lord Ronan requests your presence in the library, my lady. Immediately. Eloan smoothed her plain gray dress, tucked the small leather notebook deeper into her pocket, and went. The library smelled of old leather, stale cigar smoke, and barely contained fury. Ronan stood behind the massive desk like a general surveying a battlefield. Vespera occupied the high-backed chair beside the fire, posture perfect, expression glacial. Alaric leaned against the window embrasure, arms folded, face unreadable. Ronan did not invite her to sit. You will cease this nonsense at once, he began without preamble. The sale is legal. The money is spent. You will sign a statement attesting that you misunderstood the documents and that no coercion occurred. You will apologize publicly to both of us for your impertinence. And you will never again interfere in estate affairs. Eloan met his gaze without blinking. I will do none of those things. Ronan's fist came down on the desk hard enough to rattle the inkstand. Then you leave us no choice. Vespera spoke next, voice soft and venomous. We have decided, in light of your disruptive behavior, that your continued presence at Ravensmoor is untenable. You will be removed to the dower house at the far edge of the estate. You will receive a modest allowance, barely enough to keep body and soul together, and you will have no further contact with the household, the tenants, or the accounts. Eloan felt the words land like stones in deep water, ripple spreading, but the surface still holding. And if I refuse? Ronan smiled, thin and cruel. Then we shall have you declared mentally unfit. A tragic case, the young bride, overwhelmed by the demands of her new station, prone to delusions of grandeur and interference. We already have statements from the physician who attended you last month when you claimed a headache. 2 more signatures and the magistrate will sign the order. You'll be confined, quietly, discreetly, until such time as you come to your senses. The room tilted. Eloan looked at Alaric. He would not meet her eyes. The betrayal cut deeper than any threat of confinement. She had expected cruelty from Ronan and Vespera. She had braced for it. But Alaric's silence, his refusal even to look at her, carried the sharpest blade. She drew a slow breath, forcing her voice to remain steady. You would lock away the woman who kept your tenants fed, your roofs sound, your quarrels from exploding into scandal, all to protect your gambling debts and your pride? Vespera's smile was almost pitying. We protect the family name. You were never truly part of it. Eloan turned to Alaric again. Say something, she said quietly. Anything. He finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were wet, miserable, ashamed. I tried to warn you, he whispered. I told you to be careful. That is all you have to say? He looked away again. Ronan stepped forward. You have until tomorrow noon to sign the statement and accept the dower house. After that, the physician will be summoned. Choose wisely. Eloan gave them one last look, Ronan's triumphant sneer, Vespera's cold satisfaction, Alaric's averted face, and walked from the room with her head high. She made it to the corridor before her knees buckled. She slid down the wall, back against cold stone, and for the first time since coming to Ravensmoor allowed herself to feel the full weight of it, the years of invisible labor, the hope she had guarded so carefully, the fragile dream of belonging, all of it crumbling under the heel of people who had never once seen her as human. Tears came then, hot and silent, soaking the bodice of her dress. She wept for the girl who had arrived here full of earnest dreams. She wept for the woman who had become necessary yet remained unseen. And she wept for the betrayal that hurt most, not the threats, not the cruelty, but the quiet, cowardly silence of the man she had once believed might love her. When the tears finally slowed, she wiped her face with shaking hands and stood. She would not sign their statement. She would not accept the dower house. She would not allow them to erase her. But she was also not foolish enough to believe she could fight them alone from within these walls. She needed allies. Proof. Time. And above all, she needed to protect the people who had come to depend on her before the storm broke over them all. That night, under cover of darkness, she slipped into Mr. Gwithian's office and copied every damning page she could reach. She sealed the packet with plain wax, no crest, and addressed it to the one person she believed might still possess both influence and conscience, the Dowager Countess of Trescothan, an old friend of her mother's who had once told Eloan, years ago at a garden party, "Truth is a stubborn thing, child. It waits for the right hands." She entrusted the packet to Nell, with instructions to deliver it to the village post at first light, no matter what happened. Then she returned to her room, locked the door, and sat by the window watching the moon sail over the snow-covered fields. She had given everything to this house: years, kindness, silence, strength. They had taken it all and offered contempt in return. Now they would learn what happened when the woman they had dismissed as nothing at all decided she was done being nothing. The echoes of their betrayal rang through her bones. But beneath them, something harder was forming. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Something unbreakable. Resolution. Have you ever been betrayed by the one person you thought would stand beside you? How did you find the strength to keep going when the ground itself seemed to turn against you? Your stories of survival and quiet defiance matter. Share them below. I'm listening. The clock in the east wing struck midnight with a hollow metallic cough, and still Eloan sat motionless by the window, the packet of copied documents long since sent into the night with Nell. She had expected some immediate retaliation, servants ordered to pack her things, the physician arriving at dawn with his leather case of sedatives and restraints, but the house remained eerily quiet. Too quiet. That silence was worse than shouting. It was the sound of people deciding what to do with something they no longer wished to acknowledge. She had not slept. Sleep felt like surrender. Instead she watched the snow fall in slow, relentless sheets, blanketing the world until every outline blurred into sameness. The cottages below were invisible now, swallowed by white. She wondered if the tenants were awake, if they sensed the storm gathering above them even as they slept beneath newly mended roofs. A soft knock came at the door, 3 hesitant taps. Eloan rose, muscles stiff from hours of stillness, and opened it. Nell stood there, face pale as milk, eyes enormous. "They've locked the outer gates, my lady," she whispered. "And the stables. Mr. Thomas tried to take the pony cart to the village this morning, said he was running an errand for the kitchens, and they turned him back. Said no one leaves until Lord Ronan gives the word." Eloan felt the cold slide deeper into her bones. "They mean to keep me here until I break." Nell's lower lip trembled. "Mrs. Tremaine sent this." She pressed a small cloth-wrapped bundle into Eloan's hands, 2 warm oatcakes, a wedge of cheese, a tiny flask of tea still steaming through the fabric. She said to eat, because you'll need your strength. And she said, Nell's voice cracked, she said we're praying for you. All of us. Eloan's throat closed. She pulled the girl into a brief, fierce embrace. "Tell them thank you," she managed. "And tell them to be careful. If they're seen helping me." Nell nodded, tears spilling. "We know. But we're not leaving you alone, my lady. Not like they did." The girl slipped away down the corridor like a shadow. Eloan closed the door, leaned against it, and slid to the floor. The bundle of food sat untouched in her lap. She had never felt so utterly alone. Not when Alaric had first begun to withdraw. Not when Vespera had called her decorative. Not even when Ronan had threatened confinement. This was different. This was the moment she understood that no amount of quiet service, no number of mended roofs or averted quarrels, no hidden ledger of kindnesses would ever be enough to make them see her as a person rather than a problem to be solved. She had poured herself out for this house, years of patience, endurance, invisible devotion, and they had decided she was expendable. The realization landed like a stone in deep water, heavy, final, sinking. She pressed the heels of her hands to her eyes and let the tears come again, silent at first, then wrenching, the kind that hurt the ribs and left the throat raw. She wept for the girl who had believed kindness could earn belonging. She wept for the tenants who might still lose everything despite her efforts. She wept for the fragile hope she had guarded so long, now lying shattered at her feet. When the sobs finally ebbed, she felt hollowed out, light, almost weightless, as though something vital had been carved away. She rose slowly, walked to the mirror above the dressing table, and looked at herself. The woman staring back had shadows under her eyes, cheeks flushed from crying, hair coming loose from its pins. Yet there was something else there too, something hard and bright and unfamiliar. Defiance. Not the loud, blazing kind. The quiet, unkillable kind. The kind that survives. She straightened her shoulders. They could lock the gates. They could threaten physicians and madhouses. They could pretend she did not exist. But they could not erase what she had already done. The roofs were mended. The rents had been protected, at least for one more quarter. The truth was already traveling, slowly, quietly, toward the Dowager Countess of Trescothan. And somewhere in that slow journey lay the possibility, fragile, improbable, that the world beyond these walls might yet hear her voice. Eloan turned from the mirror and crossed to the small escritoire. She took out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Not a plea. Not a defense. A record. Every date, every sum diverted, every signature forged, every threat made in the library that morning. She wrote it all in her clear, careful hand. When the first sheet was filled, she took another. And another. She wrote until her fingers cramped and the candle guttered low. When dawn began to bleach the sky, she folded the pages, sealed them with a drop of plain wax, and hid them beneath the loose floorboard with the rest of her secret evidence. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap, and waited. For the physician. For the carriage. For whatever came next. She no longer hoped for rescue. She hoped only to endure long enough for the truth to find its own way out. And in that bleak, bone-deep certainty, Eloan Caro reached her darkest hour. Not broken. Not beaten. Simply present. Waiting. Unmovable. Have you ever reached the bottom of your own strength, only to discover something harder waiting beneath? What carried you through the moment when everything felt already lost? Your quiet survivals matter. Share them here. Someone else may need to read them tonight. The days following Eloan's retreat into the countryside passed in a strange quiet, the kind that presses inward rather than comforts. Morning light filtered through lace curtains, touching her face without warmth, while unanswered questions echoed louder than any accusation ever had. Yet within that silence, something unexpected began to form. Distance brought clarity. Removed from the suffocating expectations of her immediate family, Eloan found herself receiving letters from distant kin she barely remembered, an aunt long widowed, a cousin estranged for daring to marry beneath her station. Their words carried no judgment, only understanding. They spoke of regret softened by courage, of lives rebuilt after scandal, of freedom claimed inch by inch. "You are not ruined," one letter read. "You are becoming." Those words lodged deep within her. Late one evening, Eloan stood before the mirror, studying her reflection as though seeing herself for the first time. The timid girl who had once measured every word, every gesture, for fear of reproach was still there, but she was no longer alone. Beneath the uncertainty lived resolve, hardened by loss and sharpened by truth. She revisited every moment that had brought her here, the warnings she ignored, the discomfort she dismissed as duty, the times she silenced herself to keep peace. And with each recollection came a realization as undeniable as it was liberating. Her compliance had never protected her. It had only delayed the reckoning. The choice crystallized not as anger, but as certainty. Eloan would return. She would no longer maneuver quietly around expectations or wait for permission to exist fully. She would confront the family head-on, expose the fractures hidden beneath tradition, and reclaim her narrative with dignity intact. When dawn broke, it found her steady, not fearful. Courage surged, not loud or reckless, but grounded and unyielding. Whatever awaited her beyond those doors, she would meet it as herself. The forge had done its work. The storm arrived as if summoned. Dark clouds rolled over the estate, thunder grumbling low in the distance as Eloan crossed the threshold into the ancestral home. Wind lashed against the windows, rain streaking the glass like restless witnesses. Every step she took echoed, not with hesitation, but purpose. The family had gathered in the great hall, faces tight with anticipation, whispers already swirling. They expected contrition, perhaps even collapse. They received neither. Eloan spoke clearly, her voice steady despite the chaos building outside. She named the manipulations, the half-truths, the quiet coercions disguised as concern. She laid bare the deceptions that had governed generations, exposing how fear of scandal had been weaponized to control, silence, and shame. Gasps rippled through the room as long-buried truths surfaced. A forged letter. A suppressed inheritance. A marriage arranged not for alliance, but convenience. Each revelation struck like lightning, illuminating what had always been there but never acknowledged. When the family head attempted to interrupt her, thunder cracked overhead, punctuating her refusal to yield. "I will not be made small to preserve a lie," she declared. "Not anymore." The storm reached its height as alliances shifted in real time. Those who once stood silent found their voices. Old resentments spilled into the open. The illusion of unity fractured completely. And in the center of it all stood Eloan, unmoved, unbroken. As rain battered the estate, relief washed through her. Not the quiet relief of escape, but the triumphant release of truth finally spoken. Whatever consequences followed, they would be honest ones. Nothing endured unchanged beyond this vortex. Morning came gently. The storm had passed, leaving the estate washed clean, sunlight catching on damp stone and glistening leaves. In the aftermath, the world felt different, lighter, as though something heavy had been set down at last. Eloan's life settled into a new equilibrium, one shaped not by defiance, but intention. She chose independence, not isolation, but freedom rooted in self-trust. Old doors remained closed, but new ones opened in their place. Relationships realigned. Subplots once tangled with resentment found resolution, some through reconciliation, others through release. She thrived. Her days filled with purpose, correspondence with allies forged in truth, projects once dismissed now brought to life, quiet joys reclaimed without apology. She laughed more easily, slept more deeply, loved without fear of being erased in the process. Years later, she would look back on that storm not as a moment of destruction, but of birth. Eloan had not merely survived the reckoning, she had been transformed by it. In the golden calm of an ordinary morning, she stood at her window, breathing in the promise of what lay ahead. Growth had not made her harder, but whole. Joy had not erased the past, but redeemed it. And in that serenity, she left behind a legacy, not of rebellion alone, but of empowered peace. A dawn fully embraced.